What if I told you that Ferrari already knows that his car is sentenced to Singapore even before stepping on the circuit? What would happen if the real problem of SF-25 was neither Hamilton nor Leclerc, but a birth defect that could ruin its full season? Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, did not come to Ferrari simply looking for his career with elegance. He arrived with a clear intention: to build a legacy, redeem himself after years of frustration in Mercedes, and lead the definitive resurgence of the Scuderia. But what I did not imagine was that the true enemy would not be on the grill, even in the walls of Red Bull or McLaren. It was inside the car itself. And the worst, that enemy hides does not make noise until it is too late. Since the 2025 season began, SF-25 has been a disconcerting creature. In some paths it seems to have life, responding with agility, showing short flashes of competitiveness, but in others it behaves like a soulless car. Hamilton discovered it in his own flesh since his first contact on track. The adaptation was more arduous than he and the team expected. Not because the Briton has lost reflexes or talent, but because the car did not offer a solid base on which to build trust. Each curve, each braking, and each correction at the wheel required excessive, almost forced effort, as if the car was fighting against its own pilot. The Singapore GP will not simply be one more calendar test. It will be the first major technical sentence of the season for Ferrari. Marina Bay represents the most implacable exam for any car that has problems with aerodynamic equilibrium, rake sensitivity, or difficulty in thermal management. And the SF-25 does not have one or two, but all three. The urban circuit of Singapore is a maze of 23 curves, with wavy asphalt, violent braking, medium and high speeds, extreme heat conditions, and a grip that changes back. It is a path that demands perfection not only of the pilot, but of the most thorough engineering. Here, error margins are not measured in tenths but in millimeters. And if a car does not have the ability to maintain its stable performance while adapting to the track in real time, it is intended for failure. Hamilton has begun to understand that the challenge will not only adapt to a new team, but to survive a season with a car that seems to have its own personality, and not a pleasant. At times, the SF-25 behaves like a black box. Unpredictable, reactive, and difficult to read even for the best pilots in the world. Leclerc, despite knowing him more, has also shown growing frustration, and that internal tension is already beginning to be noticed inside the red garage. What is coming in Singapore is much more than a simple night race. It is the possible breakdown. Because if in this scenario Ferrari fails again, if the car shows again its structural weaknesses in a visible way, there will be no way to hide it under the narrative of the fine adjustment or unfavorable conditions. It will be the public test that the SF-25 as built is not up to what a modern Formula One championship demands. To understand why the SF-25 is in danger in the Singapore GP, you have to open the hood metaphorically and look with magnifying glass its technical architecture. Ferrari is not failing due to lack of human talent or resources. It is failing for a design that, from its conception, prioritized balance and adaptability, sacrificing what in Formula One is usually unnegotiable: specialization and extreme aerodynamic efficiency. Let's start with the root: the aerodynamic deficit. This is not a new problem for Ferrari, but in 2025 it has become chronic. The SF-25 is a car that lacks an aerodynamic load base robust enough to withstand the challenges of urban circuits. And when we talk about aerodynamic load, we do not refer only to the wings or the rear diffuser. We refer mainly to the car of the car, that invisible area that, since the 2022 regulation, became the true protagonist of performance. The SF-25 floor is poorly optimized. According to internal sources of Maranello, the car suffers a severe loss of performance when the march height changes, that is, when the bottom of the car rises or lowers minimally by undulations, braking, curves, or pianos. This should be something controllable, but in this year's Ferrari, these changes produce catastrophic effects: sudden loss of downforce, rear train destabilization, and accelerated tire degradation. And on a layout like Marina Bay, where cars are constantly height transition due to short braking and surface changes, this defect is not a disadvantage, it is a sentence. After the disqualification in China, where the car exceeded the iron wear limits, Ferrari was forced to adopt a conservative position. They raised the minimum height to avoid new sanctions. But that decision had a very high technical price. When the car climbed, they lost even more aerodynamic load. Because in these cars, the closer the bottom of the ground is, the greater the soil effect that is generated. If you raise the car, that advantage disappears, and the car begins to behave as if they are floating on the asphalt. The problem does not end there. The consequence of this loss of grip is not less curve speed. It is something much more serious: thermal instability in the tires. When a car does not transfer correctly to the tire, it does not reach its optimal temperature window or does it unevenly. In the SF-25, this has produced extreme graining situations, especially in the rear, making the stints shorter and that the performance is bitten after only a few laps. And this is where the real knot of the problem enters. Ferrari has tried to compensate for these deficiencies with extreme setup solutions: more rear wing, more open differentials, radical suspension geometries. But all this has a limit. Each adjustment that is made to mitigate a weakness actually unbalance another part of the car. The result is an extremely complex driving machine, where each lap is a survival exercise. Even Hamilton or Leclerc caliber pilots cannot fully trust how the curved car will react after curve. Another factor that adds to the disaster is that the SF-25 does not have a clear strong point. It is not the fastest in line. It is not the best in traction. It does not stand out in energy efficiency or minimum curve speed. It is at most a decent car in almost everything, which means that it can never excel at all. This poorly executed versatility is especially dangerous in circuits where weaknesses are magnified, as is the case with Singapore. And the most alarming thing is that the team seems to have reached a development plateau, without margin for short-term technical innovations because modifying the floor requires structural redesign, and without sufficient time to test new elements without putting reliability at risk. Ferrari has entered a loop. To keep the legal and safe car, they must sacrifice performance. To recover performance, they must risk sanctions or errors. This vicious circle is the great executioner of the SF-25 and could be the culprit of an absolute disaster in Marina Bay. Singapore does not forgive unstable cars. It does not allow piloting errors, and does not grant opportunities to teams that do not understand the operation of their own car. The SF-25, unfortunately, seems to meet all these negative conditions. And while McLaren refines his MCL-39 to dominate in extreme conditions, Ferrari is forced to choose between running with fear or assuming desperate risks. What is at stake in Singapore goes far beyond a specific result. It is not simply a difficult race in a technical circuit. This is the exact moment in which a team can lose narrative control of its season. For Ferrari, Marina Bay GP will not only be a performance test, it will be a public trial on the true state of the SF-25 project. And if the Scuderia fails again, internal and external perception could become irreversible. The worst possible scenario is not just losing in Singapore. It is losing confidence of fans, of sponsors, of the pilots themselves. Once a team like Ferrari loses internal credibility, an atmosphere of doubt is installed that is very difficult to reverse. The year is long, but in Formula One, the sensations solidify quickly. And every race that passes without a clear improvement in the car is a career that moves Ferrari to his main objective, to be a world champion again. And the most ironic thing is that Singapore GP also represents a unique opportunity. If Ferrari manages to surprise and overcome his technical limitations with a solid performance, they could give a positive turn to the entire narrative. I wouldn't need to win. Only with being competitive, with showing that the SF-25 can survive in a hostile environment, moral, trust and maneuvering margin to continue evolving would be recovered. But if they do not succeed, then this race can become the indelible brand that defines Ferrari's 20th season as another wasted opportunity. And for Hamilton, it could be the confirmation that the last great project of his career is closer to becoming a strategic error than in a redemption history. Because in Formula One, the inaction is paid expensive. The teams that do not evolve with intelligence, that do not correct in time, that do not listen to the technical signals before it is too late, simply disappear from the conversation for the title. And the most alarming thing for Ferrari is that this time they are not falling due to strategic errors in the race or by controversial decisions in boxes. They are falling for something much deeper, a structural weakness of their car that not even their engineers have managed to solve in months of development. If the SF-25 fails again in Marina Bay, the coup will be more than sports. It will be symbolic. It will mean that Ferrari, the most historical team in the category, with the most laureate pilot of the grille behind the wheel, is unable to compete at the highest level in extreme conditions. It will mean that, once again, the team that promised a technical revolution fell short. That the illusion of having Lewis Hamilton dressed in red has not been enough to break with the ghosts of the past.